going to do today is I always feel at the end of my session, you should have something that you could actually take and do something with. So what we have are, I've prepared a list of things to think about. And at the end of this session, I want everybody to do 3 things. See, I'm learning this whole screen thing. The first thing I want you to do is I'm going to ask you at the end of the session, I want you to have one thing that you're going to do, that you're going to think about and do and act on. I'm going to have one thing that I'm going to make your staff do, think about and act on, and one thing for your board to do, to think about and act on. So that's what we're going to do with this session. So, you know, there's one thing that hasn't changed. I've been arguing for years and years and years that we need to have planning that is continuous and not something that happens just once a year, but it happens or once every 3 years for the big strategic plan. What we need to do is to be planning constantly. I have been totally amazed that I have had people to call me and say, well, since we're not doing anything else for the next couple of months, why don't we do a strategic plan? And one of the challenges is, how do you do a strategic plan when you have no idea what the future looks like? And what I want you to do is to learn how to just keep planning on a short-term basis constantly. So I've been changing for the organizations that I work with. Virtually every month, I'm revising the budget for them and re-looking at the program plan based on the new information that we have. So we live in a very fluid world that does not align with the fixed nature of an annual budget schedule. If it did, COVID would have started at the first day. We would have gone into lockdown on the first day of the state fiscal year and come out of lockdown on the last. And that did not happen. So what we need to do is to constantly relook at what we're doing. And we need to think strategically. And there are 5 components to a strategic plan, not a strategic plan, to strategic thinking. You have to be intent focused, which means you have to know where you're headed for. You have to have a systems perspective, which means that you know everything that's going around. You have to be able to take advantage of opportunities that come about. And you have to think like a scientist and be hypothesis driven. And always say, what if? What will happen if? And you have to think in time. And thinking in time is what we're going to focus on today. When Wayne Gretzky, who was a hockey player, said, "Why are you so good?" He said, "I skate to where the puck's going to be, not to where it's at." So we have constantly got to be thinking about planning for where we're going to be at. And that's what this whole thing has got to be about, because there are things that we know and things that we don't know, and things that we don't know that we don't know. Like, nobody planned for this. A year ago, nobody thought we were going to be closed down for an entire year. So what I'm going to do today is to talk about various things that nonprofits know about and what we have to kind of plan for. And I'm going to start with individual donations. And what we know is that donations increased by at least 10% in 2020. People are starting to do the research on that, and donations have significantly increased. And there are some reasons for that. Number one, the stock market has been exceptionally strong, and wealthy people like to, when they have a lot of money in stocks, feel comfortable and tend to give more. We've had some tax tweaks that have increased and have had incentives for giving. Probably the biggest thing that happened is that people have reduced other spending. So people haven't had to commute. People haven't had entertainment to spend money on. I don't know about you, but I haven't bought any new clothes that haven't had elastic in them in the waist for a year. I haven't had real shoes on my feet in a year. So people had more disposable income to give money. And they did. And also people care about other people. And we gave money to food banks and other places. Certain types of nonprofits fared better than others during this. Food banks, the ones having direct human service. And that was done at the expense of some other types of organizations. What you have to look at is, how did your organization do? And did your organization were you one of those ones that had increased donations because you were dealing with human services? So I have to ask you, if that was the case, what are your plans for maintaining those donors? Who are they? Is it that you have more donors? Is it that the existing donors gave more money? But you have to think very carefully about how you can maintain those donors. On the other hand, if you had one of those organizations that actually lost donors, what is your plan for getting those back? And now is the time to start doing that analysis on your donor base and start doing the planning. And I've talked to other people and they've told me, oh yeah, we did really good this year. And I said, new donors or bigger donors? And I look at me and say, does that make a difference? And my answer says, yeah, and you got to plan on how you're going to keep those. The thing, we've got a very robust stock market right now. If that fails, what's that going to do to your donor base? And what is your plan going forward to convince people that they should give to your organization and make contributions rather than use their money for travel, entertainment, and other things when the world opens up? So I want you guys to start, I really want you guys to start thinking about that. And as we talk about this, this is a task that you can give to, if you're big enough to have a development director, they should be starting to look at this. Also, I think this is worth having a conversation in the board to get their views on how their givings, how they've been giving, and how we can work toward getting a plan to either grow our donors or to grow our donors or increase them. Corporate donors are the same things. Who are they? Did you keep them all through the pandemic? If you've lost some of them, how are you going to get them back? Are they there to get back? But if you don't have the answers, you need to get the answers and be thinking about this. Foundations. Foundations, the amount of money that foundations have is generally directly connected with the value of the stock market, because most of their monies are invested in the market and they have to give away 5% of their assets each year. So if the stock market goes up 20%, the foundations have to give 20% more. They are allowed to do an averaging. So if they look at the last 3 or 4 years, they can average the amount that they can take those past 3 years or past 5 years, a moving average, and use that as the base for their giving. So even if we have something happens with the stock market, I still think there are going to be plenty of funds for FY21 and probably funds into FY22. During this time, I think the foundations have leaned toward giving to the one, like I think many individuals did, to the basic human services. The question is, once again, did you lose any funding? How are you going to get it back? I think it's going to be very difficult if you haven't been a funder. I don't think they're going to be giving grants to new individuals. I think that's going to be hard to get, but I think you have to think about maybe being able to up your ask. And is anybody on this call that works for an arts organization by any chance? I think the arts are going to be are in just very bad shape, and it's going to be interesting to see whether the foundation community is going to try to save the arts organizations or not. I think that's an unanswered question. Fees for earned income and fees for service. When are you going to be able to open up again? And I think that becomes a real issue. And once we open up, is anybody going to come? And these are issues that you need to talk through with your staff. What services do you have? And what happens if the world opens up June 1st? What happens if it opens up September 1st? What happens if it opens up next January? And you kind of need to have a plan for each of those. If you run a summer camp, are you going to be able to do it this year or not? If you run have a conference like this, will it have to be online? I can't answer that question for each of you, but I think it's very important that you begin to think about these issues and say, okay, the world is going to be opened up September 1st. What do I have to do to be ready at that time? And what happens at that time if I only get 50% of the people participate that used to participate? What happens if I only get 75% of the people participate? What happens if I only get 100%? If I get 100% of the people participating, that's great. But you need, and the challenge is, it's just not one plan. What you're going to have to do is, I'm saying at this point, make 3 plans: June 1st, September 1st, and maybe December 1st or January 1st. And then for each of those plans, what's it going to be if we only get 25% participation, 50% participation, 75% participation? So it's way more complicated than we're used to. But I see no other way to do it if we're going to make reasonable decisions going forward. And if you open up, how are you going to make those people know that you're open for business? I think all of us are so tired of emails and the information is just sometimes overwhelming. So you need to think of ways to make sure that you're getting to the right customer, the right consumer, the right user of your product, saying, we are ready to go. And you may even start talking to them now, or at least a sample, to say, what's it going to take for you to come back? Okay, what do we have in place for you to feel comfortable to come back? And that may help you make your decision. Now, let's talk about government money. Maryland, like most of the other states, I think there are only 3 other states that don't require this. Maryland has to have a balanced budget, which means we can't spend more than we bring in. And we're fortunate that Maryland is one of the most, has done better financially than a lot of states. But sooner or later, somebody's going to figure out how much this has cost us. And I'm already seeing a little bit of, there's a term called the canary in the coal mine, which they used to take canaries down, and if the canary fell off the perch, it meant there wasn't enough oxygen for the rest of the miners. We have a situation. I've seen a couple small grants that government grants that have been sliced a little. Instead of the amount we got last year, we got 90% of what we got last year. And so I'm already seeing some tinkering with government money. So I think that we're going to be okay. Most of us are going to finish FY21 with the grants we already have in place. I think we're going to start seeing we may see some cuts in FY22. And I think we have to be ready for that. The other thing with our government money, if you haven't done it, start doing your budget revisions now, because I'm assuming that many of you have government grants that have line items like travel. that has disappeared. Or line items like postage that, I don't know about you, but the postal service has been so bad that you're using less and less stamps and going to online banking and online this and online that to avoid sending anything through the mail. But government moves slowly. They're moving even more slowly than usual because they're working from home. What we need to do is, if we need line item changes, we need to do them now. So at the end of the year, we're not leaving that money on the table for them to take back, because they will try to take it back if we don't spend it. So a lot of what I think we're spending money on is either protective equipment or new technology. And so you need to look at those, every single one of your budgets right now, and go to your funder and say, I need to make these line item adjustments. And if you need technology, and in your planning you find you're going to need more equipment, do it now. Don't wait until April or May, because they may not want to do it, because by that time they may be trying to claw back as many funds from this year's grants as possible at grants and contracts to take to the next year. And I'm sure all of you are doing it, is just staying on top of any money that comes across, that comes around. The Payroll Protection Act, I think, has been great for people. A lot of I think just about every nonprofit I worked with, which is maybe 30 or 40, have gotten Payroll Protection Act #1. Fortunately, some of them have managed to survive pretty well through this and aren't eligible for the second round. But look and see if you're eligible, and there's nothing wrong with taking it. Also look at, and I know, for instance, if you're in the arts, that there's $5 million of relief grants for the arts in the governor's budget. And as soon as that becomes available, you should be writing those grants and ready for it. So, and of all of this money, it's the early bird that catches the worm. So just make sure that you have somebody on staff whose job it is to know what's going on and making you aware of this money. So I have this whole array of folks, everybody with their mics turned off. For my helper, is there any way to turn the mics on so people can ask questions?
All we gotta do is hit the space button.
Yeah, we just have to unmute ourselves.
Oh, okay, great. So I've got a couple people that I can see that are nodding. I'm gonna pick on a couple of you. Heather Lawler.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what organization are you with?
So I'm actually kind of in a different scenario. I actually am an outsourced CFO that reports to boards, but then I also sit on a couple of nonprofit boards myself. So to pick one organization would be difficult for me. Yeah. But okay. I'll start with the Chamber of Commerce for Anne Arundel.
Okay, and how are you guys doing? And what's your biggest revenue that you think the biggest revenue challenge is?
Well, for the chamber, the hardest part is with a lot of businesses either closing or their services and revenues drastically reduced. we've seen chamber membership revenue go down significantly. They're having to cut back on costs, and membership to the chamber has seen the impact of that, unfortunately.
And tell them they're not alone.
Right.
Two of my clients are national academic associations for academics, and the university budgets are being slashed, and the first thing that goes is membership and conferences.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, Brian Abel, right next to her. Can you unmute?
Yes, I'm Brian Abel with the Southern Maryland Tennis Foundation, and we certainly had last year. Weren't able to operate in the spring or much of the summer but being outside, we were able to do some things outside starting in the late summer and fall, and but of course it affected indoor activities with the COVID situation, just in terms of direct services. People seem to be ready to go with the limitations to actually do programs this spring. So we are doing some programs this spring.
Do you do youth work?
Yes.
And I'm sure parents are just dying to get their kid out of the house.
Sure, they are, but the limitations come up. Even last fall, if one of the parents, had a situation at work, then there's quarantines, that there's protocols, and so even if someone signs up for a program, that doesn't mean they're going to participate in the program. So you can't just assume that someone signs up and is interested that they're actually going to be there for the full program.
See, this is all the issues that we're not used to dealing with. Okay, I'm going to ask Nancy Easterling what's going on in her world.
Good morning, everybody. I'm the Executive Director of Historic Sodderly, a 300-year-old National Historic Landmark down in Southern Maryland. And what aren't the ways that we have been affected is really more the question. Financially, we are not county, state, or federal. We have to earn every dollar every year. And a lot of our income, unfortunately, is special events. And need I say more? That just went down the tubes. So we did rally as far as our mission went. We rallied into virtual platforms on a lot of different programs, have continued, we've got a huge cadre of virtual programs coming up. We did go back to having tours, though we had to modify how we were doing them. We'll go back to doing those again. We're trying to have some hybrid of events. But honestly, thank goodness the state values some of the history sites and everything. There have been grants available for tourism sites. We have applied for PPP, which is keeping us going. But as we look toward the future, it has never been a good business model to depend heavily on special events. And we are very, very, very much aware of this. But this just sort of forced the hand. What can we do moving forward that is not the case? And that is what so many of us are dealing with. Earned income, a third of museums may be lost because of the pandemic, and earned income is a big reason for that. So we are trying to figure out how we can get to a sustainable future. These one-time grants have been great, but we know those for what they are, one-time grants. So what are we doing moving forward? We wish we had all the answers, but we don't yet.
Well, that's the problem. Nobody has the answers.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's Brian without the last name. Tell me what you do and what your answers are.
Well, I just recently retired from the federal government. I'm getting back into some of the nonprofit stuff. I'm currently working on 2 strategic plans for churches right at the moment.
Oh, so boy, it must be fun trying to do strategic plans when you have so little idea of what the future looks like.
It's interesting and a challenge, but I used to work for the Navy, so I'm used to having a lot of undefined requirements.
Okay, so we've talked about the income challenges. Now I'm going to talk about some of the challenges on the expense side. And the first thing we're going to talk about is personnel. One thing we know, leave balances are going up. Both sick leave and vacation leaves. Vacation leaves are going up because nobody can take it. Number one, there's no place to go. Number two, people used to take vacation days to have the plumber come to their house. If you're working at home, you don't have to take time off if the plumber comes. And a lot of organizations are finding that people aren't taking sick leave because you don't have to take it if nobody knows whether you're working or not. And so there's a couple of things that are going on. One is a supervisory type of thing. How do you supervise staff to make sure that they're working their 8 hours when they're working remotely? And then there's just the accumulation of time. And this has a couple of impacts. And I know there are a couple of financial people here. If you have a large enough organization, you need to start figuring out if this vacation time is what the impact's going to be on your financials at the end of the year. What most people don't realize is if you're a large enough organization, you have to count the value of your accrued vacation time as a liability at the end of the year, which means that if that liability increases, that means the expense increases. And a couple of organizations have seen it go from like a $10,000 liability to a $30,000 liability, which is going to result in $20,000 more of a loss. I've got some financial people on the line that I can see that are nodding. Yep. But if you're not a financial person, but you're the executive director and don't get what I just said, talk to your finance person to say, are the current levels of vacation really going to impact my bottom line? And since a lot of us have a year end that ends in June 30th, now is the time to think about that. So there are no financial surprises at the end of the year. So we have a couple of issues. Number one, if they're working remotely, is the time being recorded? And number two is, what's the financial impact? And then the third thing that I'm getting concerned about is when it opens up, how are you going to assign when people can take vacations? If you're a big enough organization, need coverage, this may be an issue. We can't wait till we open up to think about this. We got to start thinking about it now. And some of you may have a use it or lose it policy on vacation time. And if they haven't been able to take the vacation, is that going to piss off your staff? So start thinking about this. And this is something you may have to, because it may be changing policies. You're going to need to talk to your board of directors about if there's a policy change, or if we're going to make a one-time adjustment that says, okay, we're going to allow you to carry over, but you're going to have to use it up to a certain point. Some people, if they're in a decent position, have elected to buy out some vacation time, to just pay people for the unused vacation time. But this needs to be thought about. We also have to start thinking, and this is where we get the board involved. Right now, about 70% of the people in the US are working remotely. Before this happened, it was 20%. About 55% of the people say that they want to keep working remotely at least part of the time. Okay, now's the time to start thinking. Are you going to let everybody who wants to work remotely work remotely? Or are you going to make them come into the office part of the time? Who's going to be allowed to work remotely and who isn't? And we're going to have to start thinking about new employee policies for this. And one of my clients who went to the state and said, we're trading in, we want a budget revision. We're not going to spend anything on travel this year. We'd like to use the money to hire a consultant to rewrite our policy manual, our employee policy manual. And they're in the process of doing that to take into account the new policies we're going to have based on the vacation, working remotely, all of these issues. So the next thing is, if you're going to let them work remotely, what do you need all of that office space for? So the first thing I would tell every one of you to do is, if you're working remotely now and have a lease on office space, figure out when the lease ends so you can start thinking about whether you're going to renew it or not, or whether you're going to renew it for all the space that you have, or whether you can renew it. Do you have the right to sublease it? One of the things that if staff isn't working there, maybe you want to co-locate with somebody. Maybe you want to get a roommate. But here's what I think is going to happen, guys. The commercial real estate business is in tough shape. And chances are, if you have a renewal, they're just going to renew you and really not give you a whole lot of notice. So you're going to have to be very proactive in when you can get out of your lease, if you want to get out of your lease, if you want to downsize. But somebody's got to take a hold of this and make sure that happens. And the next thing that I want everybody to be kind of concerned about is insurance. If you don't have a cybersecurity policy and you have people working at home, I would suggest that might be the best $500 or $600 you ever spent. When you're working in an office, you have some control over what the computers are being used for and what people are doing. When you have your equipment in somebody else's home, you don't know if the 16-year-old kid borrows mom's computer at 9 o'clock at night and she says, sure, and you have no idea what can be put on it. We lose a lot of control when work is done outside of our homes. So the first thing you need to do is to think about cybersecurity insurance. And it's not that much, and I think we really need it going forward. Have you told your insurance agent how many people are working from home and how if that's going to affect workers' comp in any way? And if you're on border state lines, sometimes there's a problem if some people's homes are outside of the state. So it gets complicated, and you may want to talk to your insurance agent if you have vehicle insurance and they're not driving right now. If the fact that the office is closed, I think you need to keep your insurance agent, your insurance broker apprised of all of these things. And if you downsize, make sure he knows that you've downsized. I'm expecting that we're going to see between 10 and 15% increases in our base insurance anyhow. Just because as they try to figure out everything that's happened this year, they're very cautious. But you need to keep them posted on what's happening. And that takes us back to the personnel issues. You kind of need to know what people are doing and so that we don't get caught in these in insurance issues. And that takes us to the equipment policy. God, things are complicated. Number one, did you let everybody take their work computer home with them? Okay. If they took the work computer home with them, did you give them any rules about it? About what they could do or what they couldn't do on it? Did you tell them that that's for them and they're only supposed to do work on it, and they're not supposed to let their 16-year-old use it? Or if they're using their own computers, do you have any rules about that? Because what if they're using their own computers and uploading stuff into your system? If the employees have your equipment, did anybody think to make a list of it before it left the office? So do you know, or did everybody just come in and grab things from their office and take it home and set up their home office? At some point, you're going to need an inventory of what belongs to you, what belongs to the employee, and how all of this is used. What about passwords? Did you tell people to go out and buy their own computer and then reimburse them for it? I've seen that happen. Do you have passwords for it? What happens if the employee leaves? What's your policy on getting the equipment back? All of this needs to be documented someplace, and we have to have a policy on it. And it's complicated, but it has to be done. So Sue, some of you, I can see your face, and Sue's nodding. So Sue, you want to unmic and tell me about what's happening with your equipment?
Well, we only have our executive director that takes her computer home periodically to do work at home. You're absolutely right. No list. We have no list. I have no list of equipment, what she has. We do have a development director. She has moved her office down to our thrift store, but I think she's taken stuff home to her office at home. I don't have a list of that. These are great points. Passwords, the same thing. We don't have, I can get passwords for our database and our payroll system, but I don't have passwords to their computers. You're absolutely right. What if something happens? What if they get hit by a truck? And God forbid they get hit by a truck, or they leave. These are all great points, and we don't have policy. And I really this is really good to know, really. Yeah, it's unbelievable that what's coming to mind through this whole thing. I am definitely going to look into the workman comp, because we do have someone working from her home office every once in a while. You know, what if she gets hurt at her home during work hours or that kind of stuff? But no, great points. Excellent points.
Okay, Terry Branch, you want to unmute and tell me what's going on at your place?
Well, actually, I am here. Like one of the other ladies has already said, on multiple nonprofit organizations. The majority of them do not have equipment because they're self-sufficient. And the one that does have equipment, I'm pretty sure they have been keeping account. They're very accountable on the assets of the foundation. I think we're in excellent shape. However, I do telework and I work for the federal government, and we have done all of the things that you have discussed implementing as far as the inventory, tracking time, and all of that stuff. So I'm on two spectrums of your conversation, and you are 100% right. You have to be accountable. But as far as the nonprofits, those that haven't must done. And as far as insurance is concerned, you definitely need your insurance. You definitely need to know what's being used for your equipment and all those things. So great advice is all I can really say at this point.
Okay, Nancy Easterling, do you have people working besides yourself? Do you have people working at home?
Oh, this is my office. I'm at work.
Oh, okay.
We have a world of crazy. We have some people that are constantly at home. We have people, all different health needs, families, everything. So we have some that have almost never come in, some like me who never left. Because it's a site. There had to be somebody around doing things. So I never really left. We have people on the other end of the spectrum, and then we have a whole bunch of people in between. We have a whole bunch of people that come in 1 or 2 days a week and are home a couple of days a week and have a lot of flexibility right now. So we did have donated to us some laptops. We've never had our own everybody was using their own laptops at home. A few people took a mouse home or a screen that had been donated to us from somebody else, so we hadn't purchased it, and they took those home, but for their laptops. Otherwise, these other laptops, when we did get those in and make them available to everybody, before those went out, we did develop a policy. We have a policy everybody signs up on, and then says, look, if you're taking this home, here's a skinny on it. Now, we have not thought about any kind of cybersecurity insurance, and I am going to be looking into that, certainly, because it's not something that I had even thought of before. And we weren't in the cloud before this. We weren't able to access our emails outside of the office or our files. And we very painfully went into the cloud a couple of months into it. And it was a little nutty, but we are all downloading things directly into the cloud now. And so it's a concern, how things get downloaded into the cloud. Could something get introduced that way? So I'm definitely going to be looking into that.
Okay, Heather, you work with a number of nonprofits. What are your thoughts, insurance-wise, equipment-wise, space-wise?
So I find it interesting working with a bunch of nonprofits. A couple of mine are some fairly significant community action agencies who are heavily federal funded. So thankfully, they had really good insurance and policy measures already in place to where we did not have to do a whole lot of adjusting when COVID happened. Yes, all of a sudden services went from being on site to remote, but our processes and policies, including insurance, we were already kind of set up for that. So thankfully, there wasn't a whole lot of adjustment for them. But for our smaller guys, it definitely brought a level of awareness of needing to have additional levels of insurance. And we did discuss that throughout the time. It was something that kind of came to mind throughout the process of, okay, we need to reach out to our insurance company and make sure that we're covered where we need to be or as best as possible. So I kind of saw both aspects of it, and I was glad to see that we were pretty prepared for my larger organizations, which was good to see.
Are you having to have any adjustments in the personnel policies around vacation? Are you thinking about that?
Oh, yes. So we actually did so we had a use it or lose it policy with our vacation. We would knock everyone down to 80 hours at the end of the year is how we usually did it. However, this year we did allow for a one-time carryover of everyone's balances, just being sensitive to the fact that they weren't able to take vacation last year. That said, when we allowed for that, we did let all of our staff know that they were going to face the use it or lose it at the end of 2021. So they needed to be planning now their vacation and their time off, because we're not going to have this liability and this balance carrying forward for a long period of time. So now it becomes a management tool, and it's all of our managers and supervisors making sure that not everyone is taking their time off all at the same time in October, November, and December, because we still have to operate our services. We still need to meet our clients' needs. And so we're having to manage that now and be very kind of on the forefront of everything to make sure that not only do our staff know and they're very clear that they have to take their time or they're going to lose it by December 31st this year, or manage it throughout the upcoming 9 to 10 months so that it's not an issue at the end of the year.
Well, one of the things I haven't mentioned yet that everybody needs to think about too is when are schools going to go back full time? When it's the daycare industry going to be back in business? Because nonprofits historically have been overrepresented by women who generally are the primary caretakers of the children, whether they have two spouses, whether there are two parents in the household or not. And some of my organizations are if the school closes, what happens? So I guess we've all learned how to be incredibly flexible during this time. Now, I have a bunch of people that I see names and I see blanked out muted microphones, and so I don't know if they're here or if they're they've got their name up so they can tell their boss they attended this. If any of those want to speak, I would love to hear from you. And Catherine just became a person again. So Catherine, what's going on with your organization and with regard to any of these staffing issues?
So we have like a really weird mix. So for me, I'm 3 days in 1 week, 2 days in the next week. We've got people who are here full time every single day that have been doing full time every single day since before the pandemic and through the pandemic. And everyone's working on like weird shifts in terms of when they're off and when they're not off.
Well, you're doing direct service. You're a shelter, right?
No, I work for a university.
Oh, you work for a university. Okay. Sorry.
I think that's Sue.
Sue is
She's waving her hand, yeah. So it's made it a little bit more challenging, and I think it's become very heavy relying on emails, which can bog people down a lot. I know personally myself, I made a list of everything I took home when the pandemic started, and then have been slowly keeping inventory of where all those things are. And for check-ins, I don't think that we normally have really a check-in for all of us. But most of the time we just send each other emails like first thing in the morning, and then that's kind of like our check-in, unofficial check-in.
Okay, Elizabeth, I just see Elizabeth showing up. Did you want to say anything?
I just appreciate what Catherine said about a morning checkup and how you can get bogged down by email. And that is not something that happens currently with my organization, but I think that there would be real value in that, because it would be very easy to lose sight of who your colleagues are and just see them as an email, and maybe not respond to them as quickly because they're lost in that. So I like that. I like that suggestion.
Okay, so everybody here, what one thing are you doing during this whole thing have you done for fun to just keep yourself sane? So Brian, Abel, I know that you do tennis. Have you been playing a lot of tennis?
I took some time off from both playing and playing them, but I've come back to it. I've come back to it even this February in between the snows.
Okay, and what else have you done nice for yourself during this past year?
Well, starting to fix up an old house on a property.
Good. Heather Lawler, what have you done nice for yourself to stay sane?
Actually, very much like Brian just said, I've done a lot of kind of home things that we've kind of been putting to the side for a long time, and just kind of painting rooms and doing things inside my house to just pass the time and stay away from a lot of people in one area.
Okay, Lisa, what have you done nice for yourself? Lisa Bernabel.
Oh, hi, Nancy. I'm your moderator.
I know. I
okay.
knew you were.
Okay. I've been spending. I've got 2 dogs, so I've been spending a lot of time with them. And my husband, he changed his schedule. He was working like nights, and now he works more of a kind of regular 9 to 5 type of thing. So we've been spending more time together, which has been an upside with everything else going on. We do have a Q&A question that was put in here earlier by Elizabeth. And she was wondering if you could share some suggestions for ways staff members can encourage and assist the necessary shift that the board needs to make.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm finding that boards don't have a lot of bandwidth these days. They seem to be, I'm having a lot of challenges getting boards to focus on what they need because they've got their own life issues. But that's one of the reasons I kind of wrote out this list of things to think about. Because one of the things that I like to do with boards is to make sure they have a topic that they can discuss at each board meeting, and let them know in advance that this is what we're going to discuss, and the staff can provide some background, some backup and information, but you want to hear from them. So what I would do is take one of these bigger topics and say to the board, I'd like to get your feedback on our donor issues. Okay, and you can say, we know that donations went up by 10%. Ours, and let's just say ours went up by 20% during this time. Let's discuss how we're going to keep those high donor levels, or keep those new donors. And this is something that they should have an opinion on and they can discuss. So that's one thing that you could do. One topic. I would bring up the topic of your office space and we need to talk about our office space. Do you think that we need to keep it all? What are our options? If we lease, do you think we can downsize? If we own our building and have too much space, do you think that we should advertise to get a co-tenant? What are the pluses and minuses? So that could be another topic for discussion. The personnel policies, because that way they can bring what's happening in their own organizations to the table. So I'm a big fan of letting them talk. I've always said that we need to flip board meetings upside down. Because in the normal board meeting, what do? We have the secretary's report, history. We have the treasurer's report, which is generally, except when we do the budget, what we've already done. Then we have the executive director's report, what he's done. And so we're halfway or 60% through the board meeting when we haven't even asked the board to participate yet. So I like to start with things that they can talk about so that we feel like we're listening to them, and put the history stuff at the end of the meeting. Because what happens is they, especially when we're online now, if you go through 30 minutes of history, they've turned their camera off and they're wandering around the house. So I like to grab them when they're fresh and say, here's a topic to discuss. This is what we're going to discuss, and get them engaged in this. And this is why I kind of gave this to you, so you could pick out one of these and say, this is what we're going to talk about at our next board meeting. Board members need to be, we need to give them structure, but let them talk within that structure. And it's like giving them, here are 3 questions. I'd like your opinion on them, instead of saying, let's talk about development. So it should be, we're going to talk about development. Here are the questions. Well, here's the information. We have gained 15 new donors this year. How are we going? What are your ideas on how we get them to give next year? Our average donation rate went up 15%. Let's talk about how we're going to keep it at that level. Or conversely, we lost 20% of our donor base this year. What are your ideas on how we're going to get those lost donors back? But give them the discussion questions and let them go. And often they'll veer off into new areas that you never thought about, but that's a good thing, because your goal, Elizabeth, should be that the board should be speaking at least 60% of the time and the staff less than 40. And I bet if you looked at most board meetings, it's going to be 80% staff and 20% board. And we have to switch, because if people don't participate, they don't feel important and they don't feel connected. Okay, anybody have, well, I'm just going to ask because I see one more person. Tommy, could you unmute and just tell me what organization you're with?
So I am here today as a new nonprofit called Southern Maryland Loves You. We became a 501c3 last year during the pandemic, and we produce medical sanitation devices.
Okay, great. And congratulations on becoming a nonprofit, because the IRS went, I've never seen them move so slow on new nonprofits as they did this past year.
Yeah.
I had one organization that it took them 11 and a half months.
We were blessed. I think we were working on something that was important. So maybe, I don't know.
Okay,
we do have a board, and I have a lot of these same problems that you're talking about.
yes. Okay, well, one of the best gifts that people can give after money is a gift of time. And so this is supposed to go to 12:45, and we have 7 minutes left. And unless somebody has a specific question for me, I'm going to give you 7 minutes. So you can go hug a kid or pat your dog. And if anybody has any, all my stuff has my email on it. And feel free if you have any questions or any comments or need some information. I'm older than God, so I have collected stuff. So if you need anything or just need something to show your board or need a sample of something, I have it. So feel free to contact me because I'm not going anyplace. I'm like everybody else, kind of stuck at home. So I've really enjoyed getting to know all of you a little bit today. I'd be much better if I were in person, because if anybody of you know me, I wonder and I like to get into everybody's face, and you can't really do that online. And hopefully next year we'll do this again and we'll do it in person.